Okay, so let's continue with uh, our lecture again. So along the same time when the atomic structure was happening, the beginning of the 20th century, there has been important theoretical developments which are essential for understanding of particle physics, both of them. So one is the quantum theory, and the other is the special theory of relativity. So let's so they also form so one of the first ones to be detected is or proposed and uh, proposed and detected was the photon. The photon is typically credited to Planck, who was trying to understand the black body radiation, and uh, so what he did was because Wien's formula was not fitting, other formulas were not, none of the other formulas were fitting. So he tried to. He was inspired by the kinetic theory of Boltzmann, by kinetic theory of gases by Boltzmann. So he introduced some oscillators with some sort of an entropy or a frequency which depends upon only integer values, which these frequencies only the energies of these oscillators take only integers values, and through which he could really fit in the black body radiation. Of course, you see this famous formula of Planck's distribution, and where alpha is some constant of h cross and c cube. And he could also fit empirically this formula, giving the Planck's constant. So along the way, he discovered the so-called photon. But so I give you a reference for a very nice article here by Max Planck, a reluctant revolutionary, on Physics Today. This is a very interesting article about how Planck actually discovered the photon, or if you want to say the advent of quantum theory. But it was the photon was put on a very strong footing by Einstein, who actually explained not only just photoelectric effect, specific heat of gases, various things, uh, giving the photon a real particle like interpretation, where light is essentially understood in terms of particles which are made up of photons, and using this he could understand many of the physical phenomena and really put it in a very strong footing. So both of them should be credited for the discovery of photon, which incidentally is the first uh, force carrier we encounter with in the entire standard model picture. Now, the entire quantum mechanics was built around the same time, with starting with Bohr and everything. So, and special theory of relativity built by Einstein around 1905, which I think we have had. It's already what, 115 years now. 115 years since the special theory of relativity was built. So we have so all the entire classical physics fails to explain phenomena at some sort of extremes in scales. So scales at atomic scales, quantum mechanics takes over, and when the particles start moving at speeds which are very far, very close to the speed of light, a special theory of relativity takes over. So these are two extreme cases, which so quantum mechanics, which was developed by Bohr, Heisenberg, and Dirac and Schrodinger, led to the explanation of most of the atomic physics as well as chemistry, um, atomic transitions, hydrogen, which we already study essentially, that hydrogen atom, which many of you are taking courses in along with this in this semester. I would assume that these courses are taken because I cannot review the entire thing. Uh, but you should make up for those lack of this thing, because I'll assume that in particle physics, what we'll be dealing is subatomic. Uh, we're dealing with subatomic particles, uh, which have a combination of both quantum mechanics and special theory of relativity. So these are essentially particles which are at the atomic scales or subatomic scales, which are moving very close to the speed of light. So at this feature, so many things happen. Okay, so one of the consequences of this is at the quantum level, you no longer have the concept of action at a distance. In classical physics, you have something called an action at a distance. You put a magnet and then a magnet moves here. This no longer happens in a quantum mechanical picture, including, so the basic idea is that there is no instantaneous action at a distance, but instead there is some sort of a force carrier between. So there is some particle which carries the force from this particular point to the other point, which, and as we are saying that electromagnetic fields, the radiation fields are described by particles called quantum photons. There is another second important and extremely interesting consequence which happened at because of this combination of both quantum mechanics and special relativity, is the existence of antimatter. Dirac, when he formulated his theory of electrons, which are spin half particles, he discovered that there could be particles which are called electrons, anti-electrons, which are very much similar like electrons, but all their quantum numbers are reversed. What does it mean? So what does it mean that all their quantum numbers are reversed? So the quantum numbers are of electron or its electric charge and lepton number. So the electric charge and the lepton number of an antiparticle would be different. Would be the opposite of the particle. Say, for example, the electron has electric charge of -1 and lepton number of -1. In such a case, the anti-electron would have electric charge of +1 and lepton number of +1. Okay. So, and at the same time, it has the same mass and the same spin as the electron. Okay. So, this is the definition of the antiparticles. The antiparticles are particles which have the same mass and the same spin properties of the particles, but all their quantum numbers are reversed. Quantum numbers are the ones which define, which we'll see, which define what the interaction properties of these particles are. These are essentially like lepton number, electric charge. These are all called as quantum numbers. Now, when a particle and antiparticle comes together due to the properties of special theory of relativity, they can create radiation. They come together, they annihilate and create radiation. And this radiation need not be stable, it can just annihilate. It can annihilate, this annihilation radiation can decay into heavier masses depending upon the initial state electron and positron energies. So this energy of this, so you all know that energy can be converted into mass and mass can be converted into energy. So this is an application of special theory of relativity at the quantum mechanical level, purely because of the existence of antimatter. So you can have electron positron coming together, giving rise to something called a photon. We have not introduced the Z, which we'll do it in the next lecture. The photon can now decay into much heavier particles. Say, for example, it can decay into muons. It can muon anti-muon muon pairs, muon anti-muon. It can decay into, which is much heavier than an electron, or it can decay into a top anti-top, if there is enough energy of the initial state energy. So what's happening is that this photon would carry the energy of the initial electron and positron. If you have the electron and positron has enough energy, they can create particles which are much heavier. Okay, so for that you need to give very large energies to these electrons and positrons. One of the now at those times, the early particle physics experiments were aided by a natural laboratory where these particles are highly accelerated actually. So that laboratory is essentially the cosmic rays. Okay. So cosmic rays were discovered about in 1912 by Julian Hess, who were using, actually they were looking for radiation. Victor Hess, actually, I'm sorry. So Victor Hess was looking for radiation, understanding radiation and the sources of radiation. So he thought it was terrestrial, but he wanted to check how far this radiation goes. So he went up on a balloon with no oxygen and everything, and up to 9 to 10 kilometers high, and started looking at the source of the radiation. And he found that the radiation still existed and the flux didn't reduce. So he said that this is extraterrestrial, and so that was the discovery of the cosmic rays. So he rightly discovered that the source of these cosmic rays is coming from intragalactic medium. So these so people were, and the discovery of the cloud chamber also helped. The invention of the cloud chamber and the photographic plate also helped very much in this further advance of the field. Just as a side note, I'll just try to say that there is a current ongoing experiment called HESS, which is named after him. So just find out what the Higgs experiment does. It is a very important experiment, especially in the searches of dark matter and also in astrophysics. It is named in honor of Victor Hess. Okay. So since the discovery of the cosmic rays, people started looking at what are the particles which are found, what are the constituent particles of these cosmic rays. But it also led to understand or verify Dirac's theory of antiparticles. Anderson, C.D. Anderson, so this is a photographic plate coming from a cloud chamber experiment, okay, which you will find it in most of the particle physics books. So he discovered the positron or the anti-electron, which had the same mass as the electron, but it has the opposite charge. And he rightly concluded this should be the positron which Dirac has proposed. These were discovered purely coming from cosmic rays. Now, I don't know, maybe Jyotsna will cover a little bit more about the cosmic ray spectrum and perhaps the cloud chamber experiments in her lectures, but the cosmic ray spectrum spans various energies. So it spans energies all the way up to 10 power 22 eV, where the flux is extremely low, but it has energies which are so there is a spectrum which falls off as a power law exponential 1.7 or something, minus 1.7. So it has then there are a couple of features of this cosmic ray energy spectrum. We'll see, we'll try to cover it one of the lectures if we have some time. So in these rays can not just stop at producing electrons, kaons, they also can produce much heavier particles, as we'll see. So the Anderson's discovery actually verified Dirac's theory, and the first antiparticle has been discovered in 1933. Then other particles started showing up. For example, the pions. Now and then there was the muon. So now you will see typically that in most particle physics books also there is this famous statement by a rabbi saying that who ordered that when the muon was discovered. Initially there was a long confusion between muon and pion because pion is 139 MeV, muon is 105 MeV. A charged pion is roughly of the same mass of muon. Uh, but later on they could distinguish between these two. Now you can see on the left hand side, uh, uh, this is the track left by a charged pion. Okay, okay. So you see on the left hand side, this is a pion decaying into a muon and a neutrino. The neutrino doesn't leave any track. Okay, the neutrino is a massless particle, a chargeless particle, and almost a massless particle. I'll deal with the neutrinos in a separate lecture, actually. Okay, and the pions were discovered in that aspect. Okay, and here you find on the right hand side you find the muon track where a muon decays into an electron, muon neutrino, and an electron antineutrino. Okay, so this is very much similar to nuclear beta decay, and so the neutrinos don't leave a track again. So there is only an electron track actually. So this is how pions were discovered, and then the muon was also discovered. So now you have two more particles which came from, and which also needed explanation and how they fit the entire picture of fundamental particles actually. Pions also are also called the lightest mesons. They also form particles which form as mesons, whereas the muons, which are not very light actually, but they form something called the leptons because they carry something called the lepton number, which seems to be conserved in various of these experiments. So then came nuclear. So while we're talking about neutrinos, let's also talk about nuclear beta decay, which essentially led to the understanding of uh, uh, weak interactions. So beta decay, there is a mother nucleus which are also called a parent nucleus X, which decays into a daughter nucleus and an electron and an antineutrino. And this has this peculiar spectrum which you can see it like this. So if there is no neutrino, okay, if there is no neutrino or an antineutrino, this will be just a two-body decay in which the energy, this graph essentially is the energy with respect to the, this is the energy on the x-axis, and this is the essentially the intensity of the beam. Or if you want, you can think in terms of the number of events. Now you see there will be one single line if this neutrino is not there. But the experiments found a continuous spectrum of this energy. That means the energy of the electron could take a continuous amount of values. Now, if you do a simple, if in the absence of neutrino, if you do a simple energy momentum conservation, you see that the energy of the electron is a fixed number. It won't be a continuous number, so you will just have one single line in the experiment. But given that it is a continuous line, Pauli introduced a third particle into this decay, which he called it as the neutrino in 1933. And the theory was built by Fermi, and okay, it led to the understanding of the weak interactions, the Fermi theory of beta decay. So this is an important aspect that neutrinos were discovered. I'll talk about how. So people, we can think that this is the discovery of the neutrinos, but I would say that direct experimental evidence took much some more time. I'll deal with the direct experimental evidence of neutrinos a bit much later, actually, say for because it's in a separate lecture on neutrinos, which I plan to cover in the later in the course. So finally, the next set of particles were called um, uh, strange particles for a long time. These eventually ended up being called the kaons. These were also detected in cosmic ray experiments and cloud chamber experiments. So what they had was in the photographic plate, there are cosmic rays which are predominantly protons, 98%, which was not known at the time, but later on it was discovered that these are 98% of the cosmic rays are essentially protons. They come and hit air molecules. They're always present, and the flux of the cosmic rays is very well known, sort of reasonably well known, and they hit the air molecules. So they come from extragalactic medium and extraterrestrial medium, and essentially from the intergalactic, they come hit the air molecules and produce a shower of particles. And these showers go through the cloud chamber. You put it outside, and then this shower will come and leave tracks in the cloud chamber. Now, some of these particles, these are particles which are had left a track in the shape of V, some sort of a inverted V. Okay, you can see it in the bottom left figure here. So these were people were really surprised what these particles had, and they realized that these are some sort of new particles which are conserving some quantum number, which they called as a strange quantum number. So this they call it as the strange particles. So these particles seems to be conserving the strange quantum number in production, while decaying they don't seem to be conserving this quantum. The strange particles eventually will ended up being called as kaons. So these are called K particles, K mesons, and say for example, here is a K particle decaying into a pi plus 3 pi's, which is one of the very important what do you call experimental evidence for something called the tau theta puzzle, which led to the understanding of or CP conservation and various things essentially of particle physics. So the kaons typically decay into two pions, so they are much heavier than the pions, and they form sort of the second class of mesons, which were discovered around the same time. They have masses around 400 MeV or so. So with this, we start having subarithmetical particles division in terms of leptons, which are light particles which carry something called the lepton number, and then there are hadrons, which are called the heavy particles. The heavy particles are subdivided into mesons and baryons. Baryons contain, as we will see later, they also have another quantum number which is called the baryon number. They seem to be conserving baryon number. So baryons are essentially like things like proton. Proton is the lightest baryon, neutron, and all the rest of the hyperons. All the rest of the hyperons are essentially the rest of the heavy baryons. When we will see the quark model, you will see that baryons contain 3 quarks, whereas mesons contain quark-antiquark pair. And mesons do not carry any baryon number, so their baryon number is 0. These are particles which carry no baryon number. So they may have electric charge, they may have spins, various things, but they don't really have any baryon number. But they seems to be in terms of the quark model, they seem to be containing a quark anti-quark pair, and that's the reason they don't really have a baryon number. So this is the classification of the subatomic particles into leptons, hadrons. Hadrons are further divided into mesons and baryons, and then in terms of quarks. We'll see the discovery of the quarks in the next set of this same lecture.